endeavor that we're getting into this evening because I've always had questions about not, of course, just the idea of UFOs and who may be piloting them, but the shapes, the myriad of different variances in way of the characteristics of these crafts are very curious and certainly don't seem to follow any logic in way of Newtonian physics, and yet they do. Now, we talk about the metapropulsion end of things. We talk about different material possibly being utilized to create these crafts. Some claim it to be organic and have some sort of mechanical function behind it as well. But at the same time, we're looking at aerodynamic craft. So perhaps, in way of Newtonian physics, this is something to consider. But at the same time, if they have metapropulsion and they can drive a cube, I'm not really sure why the Bob Lazar model is so prominent, or the Tic Tac, or you pick yours. All right, they have silver balls, you name it. All of these are designed to decrease, the drag coming from aerodynamics, and at least that's what we have done as human beings here working with our technology. I want to thank you all. First and foremost, before we jump into the show tonight, we did hit 4,000 subscribers. Now, as I've mentioned before, numbers tend to be numbers, and there are statistics to analyze within that. But at the same time, it's an acknowledgement of the support that each and every one of you show me in your various ways, whether you're here in the chat, listening to the show, going back into the archive, sending me emails, sending me messages, calling me on the phone. And yes, you know who you are. Thank you. I am just overwhelmed with appreciation for the support that you guys have shown me over the last 2 years, and we're going to continue going strong. It's been a hell of a 2 years that we've gone down this path. Excuse me. And it's been absolutely fascinating, the people that I've met, and some of these folks I actually work with now. But I always enjoy talking to you, the listener. And once again, I appreciate that. So I'm going to bring Jared on now, and we're going to get into this. And yes, I'm probably going to start this topic off with a little bit of what I'm mentioning here in the intro, because this is certainly something that has captured my imagination for a very long time, and I guess I really haven't explored it deeply enough. So tonight, that's exactly what we're going to do. Now, the only thing I ask of you folks is that if you do have a question and you'd like me to address it on the show, please put it in capital letters. I will be able to see it much better as things flow through the chat. So, without further ado, here's Jared Murphy.
Hi.
What's up, brother? How you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's been a while.
It has, and you have, of course, been very hard at work within your endeavors. I know that you are still finishing up your revision of your book. It's not aliens, it's us. And
yes.
I think we should talk about a little bit about that as the program moves forward. In the meantime. Oh, and we will. But in the meantime, let's talk a little bit about UFOs and the shapes of UFOs. Now, again, I did mention the Bob Lazar sports model, mentioning the Tic Tac. We have the, more oblong or, cigar-shaped crafts. Again, all of these are reminiscent of something aerodynamic in way of Newtonian physics. Sorry, guys, just, bear with me. I'm at the end of 4 12-hour shifts in a row, and I might stutter a bit. I'm just a little tired, but I promise I'm here present for you.
Station.
But okay, so looking into these designs, what are your thoughts as to why, if they are aliens and not just us, okay, why would they be flying a craft that seems to possess the mechanics of metapropulsion and yet have some sort of aerodynamic characteristic along with it? What do you think, Jared?
I totally have an answer on that. I have also, since, by the way, for all the things we're going to talk to you, welcome everyone tonight. It's so nice to chat with everyone. I wanted to send Michael the new book cover. So I wanted to have like an official, hey, the book's coming out in 2 months or 6 weeks or whatever. But I did just email you and text you the book cover, the new one, and the new title. Everyone can get a sneak peek at that if you want to deal with that while I answer the question on the design.
Okay.
And I think where everyone's stuck and excited. So you have a lot of different modalities. A lot of people have different family of origins. They have different histories with religion. They have different histories of just wanting to be interested in history. And it's like anything, you pick it up at a different point and you come at it from a different angle. And there are people who, they learn about Eric von Daniken, which was a tremendous, I think, really great start in breaking all the barriers down as to, hey, we're looking at ancient technology. But then you also have Zachariah Sitchin, and then all these stories about the Anunnaki. And so what happens is a lot of people have blurred the answers to what these UFOs are, because when they do finally start looking, they start into some new trends that are out there. And by new, I mean things that have really exponentially developed in the last 10 years of societies, associations, groups, even conventions where people get together and they're building a narrative based on their association with knowing, essentially Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, Stargate. They're relating their relationships with personal firsthand experiences or what they've heard of personal firsthand experiences, and they look at these UFOs, and the first assumption is, well, space traveling anthropologists. They don't even think that far. They're just like, we're an important planet in the galaxy. And so when we look at these UFOs, the answer on the technology is, well, it's not from here. And we know it's not from here because they have minerals on them that aren't from the planet, or they're they don't look like us. There's the first and foremost. It's like I saw one. They were blue and they were gray and they were fill in the blank Smurfs. And what we all are aware of today, from new advances in archaeology with sedimentary DNA testing to gene CRISPRs, we have the ability to change the human body. And so the first paradigm that we have to really start to drop, and I'm going to address this more in my next documentary, is we make this assumption that there's this linear future progression of rock banging cavemen to where we are presently. So that's the first assumption. Well, we're the most advanced as we've ever been. So when you look at that craft, that Tic Tac, that eyewitness accounts of, we have this F-22 fighter pilot, which is using brain connecting technology, which is identical to ancient advanced humans. And I mean, just think of what we're doing now, but more advanced, and you had 100,000 or 1,000,000 years to do it. So we know there's a great TED Talk, and I was actually going to bring up her name, and I can't remember her name, but if you look up The Skin Can See, there's a great 30-minute detailed TED Talk by a PhD neurologist about how the human skin can see and sense, not just sense, but read infrared information, different spectrums. And so if you had a spacecraft and you are melding like the singularity, like Ray Kurzweil describes, if you're blending organics and technology, eventually you would not be able to look at an individual human if they've had enough time to advance and enough time to adapt anti-gravity and technology to a craft, the way that craft moves, the way that craft responds to skin or brain or interpretive signals, not just like a thought, but maybe even intuitive adaptations via even low-level brain function through the skin or secondary senses or things that we would consider unconscious. We could break all that down, but the reality is that these machines, if what we're looking at is not what appears natural to us in a terraformed, organic, biological world, because it's a spacecraft, and because sometimes we've had, like you mentioned, Bob. I don't know him personally. I just said Bob. Sorry, everyone. But those technologies, when we associate them with another mineral, I think Richard Hoagland, and I think that there are a number of people who have made very astute observations that if we've already been on this planet with that kind of technology, we've already left the planet with that kind of technology, we've already gone to other places, we've already gotten other technology, and the remnants of those technologies and those peoples, had they survived something like Mount Toba 75,000 years ago, they would have minerals and vehicles and other maybe handheld technologies and incorporated biotechnologies that would not appear to us to be what we would call human. So we constantly we just constantly relate to it from this idea that we're dealing with, oh, well, they might have been human. But again, it's, oh, wait, we're talking evolutionary biology. Well, is it really evolutionary, or is it really de-evolution in safe mode? So what we see as ourselves as being the most advanced human, what if we're really on the devolve cycle, the sleep cycle, the 10 to 15% conscious cycle? Meanwhile, way more advanced humans that, mind you, may not have been the originators of these technologies, but the surviving remnants of multiple cataclysms and wars, collectively are not collective. They don't get along. They don't agree. And the technologies and the various spacecraft we see are really various advanced humans that are remnants of what was a planetary system. That, if we're honest about what we know that we don't know, and if we start tabling these questions, we might be able to explain why there's a tic tac, why there's a saucer, why every military on the planet covets and hides the technology that they're either finding by accident, or were able to shoot down, or were accidentally able to acquire. The technology, to us it's foreign, and to us it's outer worldly. But is it outer worldly because of an external planetary, some extraterrestrial, or are we really dealing with advanced humans on their own quests for you know a a movement towards whether or not an agreement to take this planet back over, or call it home and kind of let us scurry around like ants? Or is it,
Right.
how's that for depressing? Thanks, everyone. Hey.
Well, let me ask you this, Jared, because you said a whole lot there in that answer, which I love the comprehension. If we were to
Make it dumber, Jared. Got it.
no, please don't, because this really gives a lot of insight even in between the lines for people to catch as well. But if we were to have an event where we witnessed a crash as a human population, okay, obviously this has been purportedly done before many times.
Yeah.
And we went out on a reconnaissance mission, and we were able to take some of this material and this craft back with us. And then we discovered that it did have a biological component, that perhaps the craft itself had some sort of life to it, wherein, as it's been mentioned many times with abductees and others who feel that they are in the know, many of these extraterrestrials will sit within the craft. Maybe there are no blinky boards or buttons, and they
Right.
just literally go within and connect on a conscious level with this craft. Now, I know this sounds kind of odd to us in so many different ways, because we're used to walking around as individuals. We're
Yeah.
slightly aware that there's a collective consciousness that we're all a part of, but for most people it's more of a concept or a theory. It's not practical or applied every single day. With these creatures, or beings, we should say, perhaps that is something within their everyday waking life that they are aware of and can tap into. So my question is, if we were to garner some of that material or technology, realizing that as we've done this, it is biological, how would we go about back engineering something like that? Mechanically, sure, I understand that. And even though people have done this, they've had a lot of difficulty in trying to figure out how some of these crafts have worked. Even listen to Bob Lazar in some of his recountances of what he has seen in way of technology, and how he witnessed and observed some of these people attempting to figure out the propulsion methods of these crafts. What do you think we would do in way of that reverse engineering, Jared?
I think it's really fascinating because there isn't obviously any external basis for us to do anything other than conjecture about what, even based on Bob Lazar's observations, he's not seeing the whole picture. And even as he points out in many interviews, if I say it's about this, that, or the other, then they'll know the disinformation, or they'll know that the source of the leak was me or someone else. Or if someone else within the organization spoke, they'll know that piece of information. Part of it is what they're working on. Part of it is information that allows them to know if someone's speaking out about the process of that deconstruction, re-engineering of the technology. So if we're to believe what we've all heard, you have a lot of different experts working on a project where they're trying to re-engineer it, and someone at some capstone has to be able to put it and thread it all back together. So however limited that size of group is, whether it's many or whether it's just a couple or one, someone has to be able to put the technologies together into a single um, format that creates either a new ship or reactivates a ship. So these stories of them flying these lost technology. I mean, we have brain connected, weaponized, and flight technology in F-22s and other military grade equipment. So we already have, and we've had for a long time, brain connected machines. Now, how much of that technology is directly related to this kind of research? Who knows? But part of, I think, the missing element is, and what seems odd to me is, there is enough technology left across this planet, which we've talked about um, enough. Well, not really. I guess the point is the technology that's around the world that indicates a frequency, energy, magnetic, you know, however they want to call it now, anti-gravity vortex, Victor Schauberger type machine, saucer
Hmm.
stuff. I do think that that technology, when we relate to it and say, well, that's alien technology, well, we actually don't know that. We're looking at technology that is foreign to us, and it's being utilized by organizations, clandestine or otherwise, or our own government, that again, they're not being truthful about where they found it. I mean, there could be a corresponding archaeologist who literally, if not, having anything to do with the military, there are things all around this world. I get this firsthand from many different resources, including archaeologists, that they find things that do not correspond to not only the narrative,
Hmm.
but they find things that corroborate a timeline in history to this planet that doesn't correspond to what everyone's taught. And not just that, oh, the history's different. Okay, well, if it's not A, it's the B group of rock bangers. No, there's serious indications that there was various species of humanity and they lived simultaneously. They were not progressive. And there is definite evidence then, besides eyewitness accounts of these conflicts between these different types of spacecraft, that it's not one single entity and group. So if we're repackaging technology, well, I mean, if we were to take a World War II analysis, are we looking at an Axis? Are we looking at a Panzer tank? Or are we looking at a Sherman? Or are we looking at a Panzer tank and we're trying to piece it together from another piece of technology that's completely related to an iPhone or something? Actually, I mean, just total disparaging nanotechnologies. When you said that there's a brain connection, we're also not seeing the nanotechnology connection. We're not seeing the frequency energy connection, as in, oh, well, there's wires built in. We talked once a long time ago about, I want to remind everyone that scientists, this was a great article in Science Daily. It was citing a research paper where they had created bricks from microorganisms that they were able to command them to grow into any shape they want. And we
I
talked about
remember
that.
this.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we talked about it being related to a satellite technology. I wanted to get people really out there at the idea of what we think of as a built, structured machine or a home. We're talking about technology in even something like a brick that could be really a satellite that could fly through space, self repair, and go endlessly into the nether regions of galactic travel and send back data.
Well, let me ask
And
you this before you go forward. I mean,
yeah,
within this particular organism, and I do remember this conversation. It's absolutely fascinating. Have you heard any update if people have progressed forward with that endeavor? I won't call it technology. And with that in mind, has there been any proposed theory and way of application as you're sort of suggesting here?
I think the material science fields are so interesting now, and metamaterials, things that have to do with earthquake and seismic controls. There seems to be, of all the things Ray Kurzweil wrote about in the singularity and nanotechnology, I think building material sciences and the applications, there's two going on. One is, I think when you hear the term quantum computing, that is like, oh, it's not going to be an Apple IIe anymore. It's going to be like the machines we're all listening to this show on or something. It's not going to be that kind of a jump. I think what's going on is you have an application between quantum computing, which is really going to, I think it's really going to materialize as the clothes that you wear, the car that you drive, literally through cloud dusts.
Hmm.
There are going to be fields of not only external nanobots and what we think of in reference to being able to so quickly compute what's going to look almost, we are going to start seeing the very elemental levels of what we would consider Merlin the magician or magic or
Hmm.
craft, because you're going to be able to snap a finger and you're going to hear music or sounds or compose something or edit something or what appears to be through nanofactories. There's that the melding of machine and mind, but not in the sense of, oh, I'm going to go to the retail box store to buy a quantum computer. The technology, I think, is going to mesh so quickly that we're going to not be able to distinguish the complexities of what it can compute, mimic, or transcend to our day-to-day life and function and work and
Yeah.
play, and also how we analyze things. So I don't think I think we're going to edge. I think computers are going to be practical like chop saws in order to build a house. I think in some ways we'll always have the desktop computer and I'm not trying to make a big prediction. It's just that I think that the real gray line of being able to look at technology in a few years when quantum computing comes along, and that we think, oh yeah, computing and gadgets and wristband watches. That's not what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at technology that's invisible.
Well,
And
you bring up a really good point here, and talking about the quantum physics and the end of how this is going to work with our technology, how it's already maybe being implemented within the technology that we use, even in a consumer sense. But as Dr. Stephen Greer had mentioned, and this was in Above Top Secret, that the Cousins Brothers has released recently. Check out this movie, guys. It's fantastic. Dr. Stephen Greer had given us an acronym, WSFM, which stands for Weird Science and Fucking Magic. And of course, this is exactly what he claims the higher uppers, or these, black societies that are behind, the possession of some of this recovered spacecraft material. This is what they call what they just don't understand. But the thing is, as they go forward, they're starting to understand it in a certain sense. Now, not everything is as logical and cut and dry as Newtonian physics and perhaps some of the systems that we've created
nope.
and introduced, but we can still experience it. And oddly enough, I have a sense that there is an insinuation here that that is exactly what's happening. There are groups of people who have this material within their possession, and they're getting a very right-brained experience out of it, and yet having results as if this was a left-brained endeavor. So again, bringing into
Yeah.
quantum physics, what we know right now and what we're learning as we're going forward. Even today, if I were to tell you that a particle could exist in multiple places at one time, at the same time, it sounds like magic, but it's just a facet of our universe, perhaps in a total view. When we back out and look down a little bit, again in way of totality, now we're seeing the bigger picture. We're getting a very small glimmer of the bigger picture, in which we have always utilized, but yet had no awareness of.
Yeah, and I wonder, I have questions out of all this. Are we, are we at a dead end? Do what kind of technology we might need because we've been handicapped for so many thousands of years? I mean, are we in a group that was genetically left in the disaster zone and we're not expected to survive, and we're tolerated, but there's really no end game? Are we in direct lineage of our ancestors and their original purposes? Um, there is a number of things where if we can't answer better and more quickly the elements of our past, I mean, I think it guides us in meditations, it guides us in prayer, it guides us in our faiths, it guides us in our day-to-day constitutions. And without having the questions on the table everyone's coming from a different modality of some kind,
Mm.
or a new experience that may have changed how they look at the world. But without tabling all the questions and having it out there for people to hear them, I think there is, like you said, a clandestine or a level of humanity that thinks they have it figured out, but they don't. Aren't they
Hmm.
scary? I mean, doesn't it
Well,
like,
I mean, they have it figured out enough that they're able to perhaps pilot some of these crafts and make them go to certain places. And God forbid, the
yeah,
stories that we've heard within Black Projects, dealing with a mastering of certain time travel or, um, traversing certain dimensions. Again, there's a math and a science that goes behind all of this. And again, a lot of what I understand in way of how they discovered this is they had one thing and the experimentation was empirical. So they were just trying something. I mean, look at, as they were talking about the Montauk Project, the frequency bands that they were playing with in order to
yeah.
find the one that, fit what they were desiring, which was mind control. Now, again, the thing is, they would go up one frequency, down one frequency within the bands. They would shift and create. And this took so much time to do. I mean, let alone what the result was. I mean, it took an enormous amount of time and energy just to get into these experiments and just try certain things because we don't know how they go together.
No, and then we have super obvious things like, again, for all of you out there doing, I don't care if you're paleoanthropological, archeological, we need more sound engineers, composers, applied physicists. There is a pattern to cymatic constructed buildings. There is a pattern
Mm-hmm.
to stone spheres, and by pattern I mean their shape. They're not
Yes.
perfectly round. It is not accidental. A partial erosion and neglect and maybe modification by tribal cultures, but we literally have stone spheres that seem to be wave resignators. And yes, there are some experimenters in Europe. There are people I have cited that are doing this experimental work, but it's beyond, I think, a small group who thinks, hey, you don't have to reveal. I mean, just to make an argument, and they may think, they're everyone, we're chatting about this, and it's frustrating to not be on the ends on it. But this smaller group that really has access to this technology, who thinks no, the rest of the world can't really handle it. I think there's a lot of smart mathematicians, and we
Well, wait, hold on. Is it that the rest of the world can't handle it, or is it that the people that have this don't want us to have it?
Well, I think it's a combo, but whatever it is, I would argue that the greater carrot of success of what all these technologies possibly can do would be more quickly resolved, and way the type of things that we could advance on if it was given to the greater smart population of researchers at every level. And I don't just mean collegiate, has nothing to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Look at SpaceX. Look at anyone brilliant in general. Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, there are plenty of them out there, and there are plenty of us out there. And the collective human consciousness is quite a thing. So it doesn't matter if you're the one directly thinking on the problem, and all you are, I make coffee beans. It doesn't matter. Collectively, we're reaching we have a collective amount of RAM that I do think is available now. And there are some people who can work on these problems, and they're not within these organizations. And if they
Mm-hmm.
were, the argument is, a long time ago, and I quoted this in my book originally, was Dr. Melissa Sello. I watched a lecture by her at Macalester College, and the lecture was on antiquity theft. But more importantly, one of the things that she pointed out was that uh, the Dead Sea Scrolls we take for granted are accessible to all of us. That
Mm-hmm.
was not what was done. It was a couple brave storage facility people in that, the Dead Sea Scrolls were going to be just in the possession of one country, and they were brought to California to be backed up. And those storage facility people who were fired released that to the rest of the world. And because of the Dead Sea Scrolls are a perfect example of, by not having hoarded the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that being open sourced, kind of what Elon Musk is talking about with Twitter, which is totally not a social media thing. That's not where I'm going. Where I'm going is that when you put all the eyes of the world on a problem like the Dead Sea Scrolls, the amount of information that's come out about them was so exponentially greater had it only been funneled and trickled through a small group or a specialized group or a privileged group. I think yet again, there's a small group. All I can do is make the case that if you want to go the direction of the Dead Sea Scrolls and actually get somewhere with all this, I think that where it would go if it was open sourced is way cooler and way more interesting, and would not diminish. If you ultimately could cure all disease, live indefinitely, explore the universe, go beyond this planet, I don't think, irrelevant to your feelings on aging or anything else specifically on this planet, I think humanity's course is off this planet, and one of the ways to get there is to make us as indestructible as possible. I don't think the argument that we're going to end up being lazy is a good one to negate the research that could come from releasing spectacular anti-gravity. From what we've witnessed from these craft, I mean, don't you think that all of us could do a lot better job with it if we had access?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Because when you have more collective minds coming from different worlds of academia, experience, and otherwise, you're going to get a much more comprehensive result in way of what you're working on. These people that have been, coveting this material and whatever they've got through reconnaissance, they're still a small group in respect to the collective. And although they may have been conducting experiments behind closed doors for many, many years, and of course, as a result, have learned much about the material, perhaps that could have been achieved in a much shorter amount of time if they were to open this up to some of the general public or talk about it. The problem is there's this weird human pride that I think we all sort of have in certain respects, and when one group has a leg up on something, perhaps they have the material, they feel that there's some sort of proprietary existence within their group to have this material, and next thing you know, we're branding it, it's mine. This is an ego expression, and it's something that again, collectively, we have not gotten over, and it has impeded us, obviously, as we're talking now, in way of our own progression, and it's all of us. But at the very end of the day, those that we have given power to, maybe not this year, maybe not last decade, but maybe 500, 600, 700 years ago, because the bloodlines are thick, right? Maybe those people are waiting for the opportune moment to strip themselves away from the rest of us. And this is something, I've thought about and many people have proposed. But at the very end of the day, can you actually separate yourself from the collective being here on this planet? I have to agree with you that our course is to walk off this planet the way that as a child grows up, one day they have to go to school. Well, this is an entirely new paradigm for that child, stepping out of the house, onto the driveway, getting into the car to go somewhere for an extended period of time that they are not familiar with. But it's the next step in their own evolution. I agree with you on that.
Well, we could zero down and get a little gritty on the whole Schumann resonance and if we go off world, I know people would like to be drawn into as just this one example. They would like to, well, wait, if we go off world right now, we're not designed to be that. Well, we're dealing with frequencies, energy, antimatter. The reality is we're witnessing technologies in these UFO craft, however you want to call them now, but they're machines that are utilizing sciences that I think are allowing non-degradation of the human cellular system. And that might also be why we're looking at people that we think aren't people. We think they're foreign, or they've evolved, or they're not. No, they're us. But they have the ability to do the modifications necessary to do interdimensional and or space travel or fill in the blank. But it's part of this energy and frequency technology that I think, again, the value of opening that technology up to the general public is way beyond what was achieved in a few years of having everyone's eyes on the Dead Sea Scrolls. But I think that's just one example. So I don't know, has something been bugging you for a while? I mean, on this? I mean, what got you thinking on it in general?
Well, there are many people who, look at certain things in the sky and they try to make an assessment, and more often than not, that they're incorrect because they don't know what they're looking at. They don't have a basis or foundation of understanding what's within our stratosphere at the very least. What an airplane looks like, the FAA lights that are on there. They're not identifying with some of these things. And you know what? It got me a little frustrated because at the same time we have all these nebulous accounts of, flying cubes and, cylinders that are just floating around in the sky. Now, not necessarily every one of these things are manned, and obviously it's been proposed many times before that these could be some sort of drone technology. I think it's interesting, just as a side note, that we're associating those things that we're unfamiliar with something that we are familiar with, possibly our best guess, of course.
Yeah.
But, by and large, one of the things that I have noticed with some of these shapes is that they are incredibly rudimentary. And this is significant because the building blocks of sacred geometry, your squares, circles, dodecahedrons, octagons, and so forth. I mean, these are very elementary shapes that are built from one specific point, right? Everything, even Drunvala Melchizedek could explain this in such a fashion where you begin with that dot, and we've gone over the dimensions and so forth, but the sacred geometry is there. So, when we look at something as elementary as a cube, and we see it in the sky, and then the next day you see some sort of cube formation or geometric pattern in a crop circle somewhere. Again, these might be something very involved in way of their creation. There's a lot locked into perhaps the spaceship and its design that we're not seeing beyond a certain point. Same with these crop circles. They're there for our interpretation, yet we can pull out the sacred geometry. Where is it within our constructs and what we evolve into in way of technology that we are utilizing some of these sacred geometry shapes? And perhaps within those shapes there's a power intrinsically there, and maybe we're utilizing the shape because it fits within the slot, that fits within a piece, that it kind of, it doesn't have the focus or the lean on one particular shape and the power of that shape. I'm kind of getting away from my question here, but long story short, to answer yours, that is something that has certainly propelled me forward in way of curiosity about these shapes. What are your thoughts about the elementary sacred geometry that's exhibited in these crafts?
I think what's really cool is that the idea of, we came up with this word sacred geometry because, again, it's not in our conscious, but it's in our unconscious to look at this and go, there's something to this. And yeah, we have all the geometry and the math to prove it out and say, oh, this is intentional or it's intelligent design. But we're still not comprehending that, a motherboard is a motherboard by any other name is a motherboard. And if the design to the elements of what we crafted in the past to be the foundational elements of our very existence. I think those simple designs and the things that we're calling sacred geometry are part of that ones and zeros, that that again, under vibrational medicine. Mm-hmm. We've constantly witnessed biotechnical ones and zeros, on and off, negative, positive switching. And we're like, wow, you're trying to describe a technical, designed, intentional system. And we recognize a piece of it, but consciously, we just can't piece together that my synesthesia isn't an accident. My ability to smell or see colors and make numbers or do music and do it as computational quantum math. We're not piecing it together that, well, yeah, it's sacred and those shapes work and those machines function because it's based on a system that we developed and refined at some point. And clearly there's still people using higher levels of that technology. These, again, who's ever, I don't want to say extraterrestrial, it's just the people running these UFOs and what's been accounted and witnessed outside of a government program or within it. Are they, again, are they still behind? One of the great bearing questions on this is, why did we end up here, and why don't we have a global society anymore that was building polygonal megalithic constructions along with gosh knows what kind of material sciences that have rusted and gone away. And we're seeing it in these flight machines, but maybe even experiencing it in lucid dream states, and where we say, oh, I was taken off planet, or I was out of my body. These things we're describing as paranormal. Dark hour. That's not even your original question.
We always get back to that, though, don't we?
Yeah. What was your original question as I ramble?
Talking about the rudimentary shapes within, the crafts that we're seeing, why do you think this is, obviously a system that's very easily worked with? I mean, just a square, just a circle, just an oval. Why don't we have, something that's similar within our repertoire of technology? I mean, again, these seeming to be such that they follow Newtonian physics based on their aerodynamic designs.
Tennis balls. Baseballs.
Okay. Balls. Yeah, well, I mean, we have aerodynamic objects, but, in way of certain crafts. Yeah, right. I mean, look at an airplane. Again, you have to have wings. You have to have something in way of propulsion, either from the back, on the top, like a helicopter. I mean, there's a whole science that goes into this.
Yep. Lift and thrust and what's actually going on for an airplane to fly. I mean, there's a lot of things, but I was half joking. So half my answers, everyone, is designed around you to like I'm giving you my process, but I'm also like wanting everyone to just kick it in wherever, plug in the pieces I'm speaking on to wherever you're at. And it really is for all of us to keep research hounding this. But I think these shapes and those elements, and I was half joking about footballs, baseballs, softballs, soccer balls, but the reality is that our level of application of those shapes are in our sports. And yes, there are many material science shapes that are used for graphene conductors and crystal technology. There's lots of shapes that we use, from oscillating computer the motherboard technology to medical technology to there's a myriad of things that we apply it to. But these big examples of something that's complex, at least in developing our movement in a sport. But the reality is that how does something so simple that we utilize on a very low tech way ends up being a machine that can actively block the weapon systems on an F-22 while disappearing and doing whatever it wants at Mach 22 plus.
Well, Tesla might have been able to answer that when he was alive, considering that he had the idea for the death ray. And I mean, you kind of just mentioned a possible technology that would be on at least, our warships of sort, if you will, and craft in the air, wherein they can simply, I can't think of the word, disrupt those energies around the MF and so forth.
Yeah, we have the scalar technology. I mean, we have, I think, a solid 15 years of onboards that we're allowed to know. When you want to nerd out about naval weapon systems, Air Force weapon systems, like things revealed to the public, it's like, oh, they have a scalar weapon. And yet, I just love that it makes headline news that diplomats' brains keep getting fried in embassies from Cuba to Europe, and we don't oh, that's interesting, but someone's using high frequency weapons to attack embassy employees, and that should be more interesting to people, I think.
You would think so, but there's so much, and we are inundated with all sorts of things in way of curiosities. And again, we have a lot of disinformation or information that is given to us that is limited in a very intentional way, and it's there to shape our perception of what we're actually seeing and what certain groups of people may have. Now, we know plenty of these private organizations more than likely house whatever technology we've gathered. Lockheed Martin, Skunk Works, you name it. There are a handful of these corporations out there that, again, do not have any legal liability in way of divulging what they have to the public or for that matter, to the government at large. They don't have to tell them anything. So they're contracted if there has to be some interaction in way of that group and whatever material. And of course, this is incredibly clandestine in certain respects, and you will more than likely never hear about it unless we have a whistleblower coming out of that side of the field.
Yeah.
You know, there was a my parents had sent me it was a picture of something that they saw in the sky down in Florida over the past few days. And you know, my mother had already in her mind, you know, made up that this was more than likely a balloon. She thought she saw a tail on the thing. I said, you know, 99.999% of the time, if you see a tail, that's exactly what you're looking at. You're looking at a string. You're looking at something in way of a balloon. And for whatever reason, I can't pull it up now, but I will in a future broadcast here. This thing is supposedly a, let's see, Stratolite Worldview balloon. Now, I looked this up, and I didn't find a whole lot of information in that exact description, which she had found out a little bit later on. I mean, you can see very clearly it's segmented. There are 3 segments on this thing, and it looks like a balloon. But people had no idea what they were looking at. Now, I don't know what a Stratolite Worldview balloon is, but it was stationary in the sky, didn't move at all. So again, you have another characteristic of an unidentified object in way of that stagnation in the air. And again, this piques people's curiosity, not understanding that there are mechanisms that can, to some degree, keep something stationary in the air, such as a balloon. Perhaps it was even tethered. We don't know. They just saw what they saw. But this made headline news, and people were talking about it as it floated over, you know, towards the Gulf and so forth. Again, it reminds me of another video I wanted to show you, but I can't get the damn thing to work. Over here in Worcester, last year, I had a friend who had gotten in contact with me, said, hey, my buddies and I, we witnessed something in the night sky. It was absolutely incredible. Would you like to see the video? I said, sure.
Yeah.
So he sends me the video, and there are 2 different perspectives, 2 different people filming this as they witness it en masse. And you see these, you know, lights kind of just very slowly drifting up into the atmosphere, and then they just peter out. Well, immediately, it reminded me of Chinese lanterns. Okay, so what I did was a little research on that night, and sure enough, there was a zoo not very far away. I'd say within, you know, 5-10 miles of where these people were, and they were having a Chinese lantern festival. Now, again, it goes back to people not knowing what they're looking at and jumping to a conclusion based on the fact that they just don't know, which is very odd, because if you see something in the woods and it's, you know, darting behind trees, you're not going to come to the conclusion that, A, this is definitely 100% a threat, which, again, has been the narrative within the mainstream media based on that initial observation. And you're going to look at this, you know, whatever it is darting in between the trees, and think about something different than how we look at objects that are so high up into our skies. This thing is grounded. So we have a whole cache of logical ideas and explanations that we need to play with first, and naturally would do so when we're eye to eye or level with something that we're unfamiliar with. It's the fact that it's so far into the sky. Again, people aren't versed in what's normally up there as it is. I mean, God, look at iridium flare satellites and how many times people have filmed these and said, I've caught something unidentified. Well, it was unidentified to them. But if you did a little bit of the research, went into the patterns and the tracks that these particular satellites take, you'll see when they roll over and they hit the sun and boom, then they flicker out. You know exactly where they are. There are apps that you can go and check this out. So I'm not going to sit here and say the general public has to sit down and do serious research in the world of ufology. I would encourage it, but I'm not saying that it's necessary to understand what you're seeing. Just don't jump to the conclusion. Utilize all that you have in way of logic in front of you first, and then when that doesn't set, okay, then you can sit within that 10% margin that most people have agreed exists, wherein we just don't know what we're looking at. There's nothing about this in way of characteristic that's familiar, and there will be multiple layers of what this thing is doing and how it's behaving that brings you to that conclusion.
Yeah, and I think what you just said is exactly how you have to apply it towards when you see a different type of what you think is an extraterrestrial. It is such a fun narrative to say, well, it's definitely an alien because of how they look. And it's, again, it's we're so primitive with our body modifications still. We don't at all consider that's just advanced human body modification to the point where, it's not about carving something into your skin. It's just changing your skin. It's changing your height. It's changing the shape of your eyes to be one with your technology. And again, I do recommend, yeah, you should read my new book when it comes out and subscribe to notaliens.com, and definitely go onto the member area, because that really helps with the expeditions I'm planning and the money that needs to be spent. However, I highly recommend Ray Kurzweil's The Singularity is Near. And even though it's dated publication and it's a brick of a read, the reality is that you probably don't need the first 100 economic. I mean, a lot of people are into economic models. I am not. I don't need the justification. But the details of where we're going to blend technology, where maybe having a body is optional, that's a thing. And so it's just very important that the technology that we familiarize ourselves with, it doesn't hurt to, of course, this is the basis for the news show I wanted to start doing once a week, so that we could start maybe chatting more about some of these papers. And these, you asked earlier about, there's so many different applied sciences where they're coming up with uses for frequencies and energy, and not just quantum computing, but biotechnologies and technologies that would be implemented in your clothing. I mean, we're going to quickly go from you needing a chip in your head and just, pretty much you'll energize everything you wear, and everything you wear is just a copy of everything you already know.
Blows my
that's
mind.
One thing. But did we miss a question?
I don't know, but it doesn't matter, because the flow is very natural here. So
yeah, this is like yoga for your mind, everyone. Now we're going to downward dog into the questions.
This is what happens when Jared and I get together, and occasionally when Rich and I are talking too, we just kind of get into that moment, and we just go. But I mean, you guys are, in a certain sense, listening to our private conversations here. This is what it's like, when we're speaking, one-on-one here behind the scenes. We're talking about the same things. And of course, when we come on the show, we might introduce something in private conversation, say, all right, let's get into this on a show, and then we go and obviously explore that subject at length when we're here talking to you. But we only have a little bit of time left, Jared, and I want you to talk a little bit about the revision of your book, and what we can expect to see in way of a difference possibly with what you have put out and what's coming with this new version here.
First and foremost, it's in color, and it just cannot be an option for it to be in black and white. You can't explain yellow equals 2 + 4 if it's black and white. It's just too complicated. That's just an example of trying to relate the images to the ancient and lost technology. So I think it's super important that it's in color. Secondly, it will be released here and in Europe. Working with an agent on that, and been wonderful.
Will this be published in other languages besides English?
That's my hope down the road. So it will be in English currently, and I really would very much like to complete. It was put upon me to personally read the new. I was working on the original audiobook, and then when the revision started in December, the audiobook is on pause. But as we are getting through chapters, the reality is there will be there will be a digital copy of this book available in color. There will be a inclusive read by me of the book available in audio, and that includes, by say inclusive, it means that I'm not just going to read the chapters. I will stop and I will pause and I will be describing the photos and reading the captions. That's for anyone, whether they're differently enabled or not. The reality is that a lot of people listen to books while they drive, or they work on the road. The reality is you can't look at pictures while you're driving. You can look at them when you're done. So the idea is to really be more inclusive in the read and give people those descriptions. This is important, folks, because there's over 170 photos, and there is over 20,000 words, and the descriptions are all added information. They're not just repeating something in the paragraph behind it. I like to include new information whenever possible. So some of the things that are also different about this book this round is it's grown a little bit in pages, probably about 70, 80 pages. The issue is it's so vast, the subject of our ancient lost past, and to describe it, to help people try to understand why it's so hard for old world academia to move out of their really archaic models. You have I have to cycle between explaining why do people look at it this way? Why is it so argumentative? Why is it not conspiratorial? So I don't spend more time just justifying. It's not about justifying what we're finding. It's more about, hey, be aware of this narrative because it's malpractice, and
Mm-hmm.
it's uninformative, and it's deflective, and it's fog of warish. And so then I've spent more time kind of unpacking some of the stuff that's in the book. But really, I think that this new, besides having the color and a lot new information and more explanations as to the details of each of the chapters, the reality is that this is really the first of many writings that will come,
Mm-hmm.
including and corresponding with documentaries and more work that we're doing. You and I, like the last documentary
Yes.
Terrorcore that's out on YouTube on Not Aliens. The follow up. I think the visuals are going to be so important for people to go, how is this not like, yeah, why aren't we doing that? And I think this book is really a new and better way to really start taking these, again, personal origin stories of the universe, and to not interrupt your journey, but to give you insight to question new paths,
Mm-hmm.
to help us all unpack that mystery. If it wasn't aliens, and if what we're dealing with is advanced humans, how do we get to all the answers? How do we improve our meditations? How do we improve our health? How do we improve our lives? And how do we work collectively to just be better all around as a society? And I think that the book covers a lot of it. So it's a huge, I don't know if it's better to just tell everyone, hey, it has a lot of cool stuff in it, or to do what I'm doing and start, get out a notebook and write questions down. I mean, the reality is that the book needs to be interactive. The book really requires live shows. It requires you guys out there listening to ask questions, to join us, which I have also thought about, and am committing to doing a weekly live show. It's just too vast of a matter to not address in an open forum. But I think the book will even be better this time around in an outline of all the different, whether it's conscious water, structured water,
Mm-hmm.
superhuman abilities, biotechnologies that relate to that, meditation and vibrational medicine, quantum mechanics, biological storage and flash drives, and how this ancient megalithic technology relates to frequency and sound and metamaterials and buildings and landscapes not falling down on us. And it isn't just a recycling of the old info, it's really a lot more tuning to get people to not only understand what I've written, but to send them off on their own follow up research, uh, hopefully
And
excited.
and when you do release this revision, where can we find it?
It looks like we will probably be on Amazon, and most importantly, it's going to be sold at notaliens.com. I will be honest, I need everyone out there to support what we're doing. I really, really, really desire to get into the field. And, TerraCore has a lot of what I think is going to be important, and to
Mm-hmm.
move forward the kind of experimentation that we need to do. We need to be able to get out and get back. Forensic geology is really important. Getting real ancient DNA testing, the sedimentary DNA testing that's been happening now at different institutes like the Max Planck Institute. There is just, they've done a lot with Doggerland and
Mm-hmm.
uh, Neanderthal DNA, and Denisovan and the South Pacific now. And there's so many things coming that standard academia just We can't slow down and wait for them. But I would very much appreciate everyone's support in buying the book at my. And again, I will, when we are really lining it up with release, I will get everyone on a pre-order page. We will definitely chat about that. It's coming very soon, 4 or 5 weeks, and we'll be able to sit here and have that chat, and people can put in their orders.
Fantastic. And I will, for one, be waiting for that with bated breath. I think you do a fantastic job within your work. And of course, DarkHour, the documentary, was awesome. Fantastically comprehensive in way of the archaeology, the certain theories and ideas that you presented. I don't think people really looked at in a certain respect. I think it's a different angle than perhaps people normally look out when they're, surveying a certain field. And again, I think if you guys should go and check that out on his channel, and of course, wait for the book to come out too. This will probably follow up in certain ways in what Jared has been doing in these endeavors. Again, archaeology going into water, and that's a show that I would like to get into with you, talking about water in general. And of course, I'd like to bring crystals into this as well, because there are some continuities between water and crystals, not just in way of the relationship, but geometrically within their structure. There are some very interesting similarities. But for the moment, Jared, I'm going to take you off here. I want to thank you so much for coming back on. God, these shows are always so short, but we do get into some very interesting stuff when we talk here, and I really appreciate your presence, your energy, and your passion for the field. And of course, again, I thank you very much for being here with us tonight.
Thanks for having me on again. Thanks everyone for listening and watching.
Absolutely. And Jared will certainly be back again. Jesus, man, I'm slipping all over the place here, but that's okay. The tongue does what it does, and that's why we have teeth to keep it in the mouth, right? Anyway, folks, I want to thank you so much for joining us this evening. I think we had, at least, if nothing else, introduced the idea that there's more to explore and talk about when it comes to the different shapes of these vehicles that we are unfamiliar with seeing in our skies, in way of the observation. Perhaps there is something for us that's more rudimentary that can really trigger something within our own knowledge and bring this out. Because if there are beings following a certain set of physics, okay, perhaps some that we are unfamiliar with at the moment, we know that this is something that can work. I mean, there is the existence, and it's just a matter of time, a matter of evolution, organization, that we ourselves stumble upon this type of information, and hopefully with the right people in the front are able to apply it for the best of good in way of humanity. Military will always be around until a certain point, but unfortunately in our lifetime, I don't think we'll see the dissolution of a military in any faction, but I'm ready to eat my words, so time will tell. Listen, folks, we're going to be back tomorrow night with DarkHour Paranormal, an outfit out here in Massachusetts who have also visited many of the sites that I have been to, and I am very excited to get involved with them and talk about some of the local expeditions that they've been on. Of course, they have their own podcast here on YouTube as well, and we will discuss a bit about their work within that field, and it will be great. It'll be a fun show. We'll be on tomorrow night at 11 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, 8 o'clock p.m. Pacific Time, and I certainly look forward to seeing all of your wonderful faces there. Thank you guys so much for the support. Really, really appreciate it. And yes, there will be more documentaries coming out. I have some plans again for the Salem witch trials. We'll be covering that at length. There's a lot in way of distance, physical distance, that I need to cover, so it's going to take a little bit longer. Not something I can just bang out over the course of 3-4 days. It's going to take much longer, but the production quality will also reflect that effort and endeavor. So keep your eye out for that. And of course, this summer, regardless of what we end up doing with Third Phase of Moon, there seems to be some talk about something on the horizon, maybe going out and visiting them, whether we meet up in the mainland or we go to Hawaii. I'm not certain yet. But that being said, keep your eyes open. There may be another meetup with the whole panel in Third Phase of Moon. And, of course, come August, I will be going back down to Montauk and to Camp Hero and looking at that from a different angle, of the survivors that have been through that project or have been a part of what happened there in the past, and we'll get into that. That'll be a very interesting documentary that I plan on putting out around the end of August. But in the meantime, oh, look who's here, Stu Gerson. My God, he's always been here in the background or in the chat, and I just want to publicly acknowledge the awesomeness that is Stu Gerson. And believe me, I'm not the only host who thinks that of this man, but all of you, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it, and we will see you tomorrow at 11 o'clock Eastern Time. Until then, stay explorative, stay curious, and continue to traverse the nebulous field that we're all in search for answers of. Man, can't get that one out fast enough. Oh, keep your eyes open. I have some additions and augmentations I'll be doing with these interviews very soon. We're going to be switching the format up a little bit, kind of sprucing things up, so keep your eyes out for that. That will be coming very shortly. All right, everyone, we'll see you tomorrow night, again at 11 p.m. Eastern Time. Ciao. Thank you, moderators, for the fantastic job you do here at Paranormal, and of course, thank you to the super chatters and those who donate through PayPal after the show. Thank you so much for your support.